Wealth, not the kind that glitters in banks or portfolios, but the kind that begins in the barren silence after abandonment. That wealth, the one we do not show, is earned in the dark not with ambition but with confrontation. And so I begin here, not with success, but with the moment something in me went quiet. When I speak of abandonment, I do not speak only of being left behind by others. I speak of the moment we left ourselves, when the child still porous, still dependent, still tangled in need was told, in 1,000 unspoken ways, that his hunger was too loud, his pain too inconvenient, his fear too primitive. And in that moment, we learn to exile ourselves to survive. Repression is not forgetting. It is the construction of an elaborate architecture built to avoid one thing: feeling. It is the psychic labor of disguising truth, and we become good at it. So good, in fact, that we forget what we lost. We stop looking. We stop asking. We become polished and strategic, grown but not whole. We smile through wounds. We intellectualize our ache. We say, "I'm fine." But the unconscious does not lie. It remembers everything. It leaks in symptoms, in dreams, in failed relationships, in compulsions we cannot explain. And beneath all of it, the child waits, not with hope but with memory. To see that child again is not sentimental. It is ruinous. Because to see him means to feel what he felt. It means to touch the helplessness, the humiliation, the grief, the original pain that the ego was built to conceal. And who among us wants that? Who among us truly wants to remember that our adaptations were betrayals, that our resilience had a price? But we must, because the cost of avoiding it is psychic death. Not all at once, but slowly, in the quiet death of desire, in the empty performance of intimacy, in the compulsive reenactment of traumas disguised as choices. Wealth, the real kind, begins when we stop pretending, when we stop seeking validation from the very structures that shamed us into silence, when we stop narrating our lives from the ego's polished surface and begin instead to listen beneath it, not to what we want, but to what we were denied. Desire is not luxury. It is not romantic. It is not even voluntary. It is the residue of the self that was once whole. And the tragedy is that we do not lose our desire. We lose access to it. We bury it beneath roles, routines, expectations. We discipline ourselves into forgetting what we once needed and then call it maturity. But the body keeps the score, and the unconscious keeps the story. We carry it in tension, in disease, in panic that has no name. We call it anxiety, depression, burnout, but what we really mean is something inside me is still screaming, and I no longer know how to hear it. The child we abandon does not grow. He splits. He becomes shadow, and in that shadow, our symptoms take form: the need to control, the terror of being seen, the urge to sabotage love before it can leave. This is not pathology. This is logic. This is the unconscious doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect the ego from unbearable feeling. But make no mistake, the feeling is not gone. It is only displaced. And so we arrive in adulthood with questions that make no sense. Why do I always end up here? Why does success feel empty? Why do I run from what I want? These are not questions for the surface. They are doorways to the crypt. Wealth begins when we walk into that crypt alone. When we stop bargaining with the past, stop demanding that others validate what we know in our bones, and begin instead to confront the part of us that was never permitted to exist. It is not comfortable, it is not beautiful, but it is real. To grieve the abandoned child is to recover the vitality we thought we had lost forever. It is to reclaim a self that was sacrificed for acceptance, for survival, for love that never truly arrived. But this grief has no ceremony, no applause, only the slow dismantling of illusions, the realization that we were never too much, never too needy, never too sensitive. We were simply never met. And that recognition, though devastating, is also the beginning of freedom. Because once we see what the ego was built to hide, we are no longer ruled by it. The unresolved conflicts of childhood are not merely memories, they are psychic fixations, frozen in unconscious structures. To trace them is to uncover the moments where the ego split to protect itself from unbearable impulses. To touch him is to reawaken the parts of ourselves we silenced to belong. But beware, the ego resists such work, deploying defense mechanisms to avoid re-experiencing the anxiety tied to repressed material. It will tell you to move on, to forgive, to be grateful. It will call your pain weakness, your anger immaturity, your needs selfish. Ignore it. The unconscious does not care for social rules. It does not care for narratives of redemption or performance. It cares only for truth. And so, if you are to become wealthy in the deepest sense, not with assets, but with self, you must be willing to disappoint the world. You must be willing to tell the truth that your family could not bear. You must be willing to feel what they taught you to suppress. Not to heal, but to remember, because healing implies closure. And this is not about closure. It is about contact. Contact with the part of you that never stopped needing, never stopped fearing, never stopped longing for something real. To confront those unconscious impulses, to bring them into awareness without denial, is the first step towards psychic integration. A wealth that cannot be bought, only reclaimed. Where were you abandoned? Go there and listen. The voice you hear may not speak in words. It may tremble. It may rage. It may weep. But it will tell you the truth. And that truth, however painful, however fragmented, is your inheritance, not your story, yourself. This is only the beginning. And as we walk further, the landscape of the unconscious begins to shift. What at first seemed like ruins, scattered memories, fragmented images, emotional debris begins to cohere into something more ominous, more precise. We see now that our defenses were not random. They were crafted with surgical intent. Every silence was learned. Every smile was calculated. Every withdrawal rehearsed. Because once, when we showed ourselves, it was too much, too raw, too real. So we adjusted, we shrank, we became palatable. And in doing so, we lost the one thing we were born with: psychic coherence, the right to exist without performance. The split between who we are and who we had to become is not healed by insight alone. Recognition is not balm, it is exposure. It is to stare without blinking at the lies we told to survive. I'm strong. I don't need anyone. I'm over it. These are not truths. They are tombstones, markers of where the inner child was buried, still breathing. And beneath each one is a feeling that was too dangerous to feel at the time. Betrayal, powerlessness, yearning, not the sanitized version, the primitive ache before language, before control. It is there we must return. There is no shortcut through repression, no bypass around the shame that lives beneath the surface. We want to move on, to transcend, to heal, but healing is often another mask, another defense. The ego is clever. It repackages avoidance as growth. It turns breakdown into content. It monetizes recovery. But the unconscious cannot be tricked. It knows when we are still hiding, still bargaining, still unwilling to sit with the raw material of our psychic inheritance. And so, the symptoms return. Not because we failed, but because we haven't yet grieved the truth, the real truth, that we were once dependent, that we once needed what we did not receive, and that no amount of adulthood erases that original hunger. The hunger remains. It mutates. It becomes fantasy, projection, repetition. We chase partners who resemble our wounds. We sabotage what nourishes us. We rage at abandonment while unconsciously ensuring it. This is the repetition compulsion, Freud's haunting insight. We recreate the past not because we enjoy suffering, but because we are trying to master it. Unconsciously, we believe that if we can reenact the trauma and this time control the outcome, we will be free. But we are not free. We are caught in a loop, a psychic ritual that sacrifices the present to redeem the past, and it never works. To break the cycle, we must break the silence, not out loud, not performatively, internally. We must allow the unspeakable to be spoken, the shameful to be felt, the forbidden to be acknowledged. This is not catharsis. It is confession not to others, but to ourselves. A surrender to what has always been there, beneath the defenses, beneath the persona, beneath the achievements. A frightened child, abandoned not just by others, but by the adult self who refused to remember him. And that refusal is everywhere. It is cultural. It is systemic. We are taught to pathologize our pain, to call it disorder, to medicate it, suppress it, reframe it. But what if the pain is not a symptom of illness, but a protest of the soul? What if depression is not dysfunction, but the psyche's refusal to continue pretending? What if anxiety is the cost of maintaining a false self in a world that rewards dissociation? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations to stop, to listen, to descend. Because descent is the only way. There is no ascent without first going down into the unconscious, into the muck, into the places we vowed never to return. We must walk backwards through our psychic history, not to dwell, but to recover what was left behind. Our truth, our story. Not the one we tell at parties, but the one that wakes us at night. The one buried beneath the persona. The one that holds the keys to who we are when no one is watching. But this journey is not linear. It is cyclical, recursive, maddening. The unconscious does not unfold neatly. It ambushes. It resists. It tests. Resistance is not failure. It is proof that we are getting close, that we are brushing up against the psychic edges of what the ego was built to avoid. And the ego will not go quietly. It will rationalize. It will intellectualize. It will offer distractions, justifications, spiritual detours, anything to avoid feeling, because feeling means risk, and risk, once upon a time, meant annihilation. But we are not children anymore, and this is the paradox. We can only recover the child if we do so from the adult position, not the adapted adult, the true one, the one who can bear witness without collapsing, the one who can grieve without drowning, the one who can say, yes, it happened, yes, it hurt, yes, I survived, but survival is not living, and now I choose to live, not from the mask, from the wound, from the place where the real self still waits, still aches, still hopes, not for rescue, but for recognition. Recognition is everything. It is the moment we stop gaslighting ourselves, Stop minimizing our pain. Stop performing wellness and begin instead to say, I remember. I see you. I did not deserve what happened. I deserved presence. I deserved attunement. I deserved to be known, and I will no longer abandon myself to maintain the illusion that I was unscathed. That illusion is dead. Let it rot. Let it decay. Let the false self fall apart, not to destroy, but to uncover what it was hiding. Because beneath the rubble is not just pain. There is power, not the external kind, the internal kind, the power to feel without fragmentation, the power to hold contradiction, the power to be fully human, flawed, wounded, messy, real. This is the wealth we were never taught to seek, the wealth of integration, the wealth of owning our history without being owned by it, the wealth of a self that no longer splits to survive. And so the journey continues, relentlessly, without destination, without guarantee, but with one quiet promise, that we will no longer look away, that we will no longer make the unconscious carry our burdens alone, that we will bring the exiled child back into the light, not to fix him, but to stand beside him, in grief, in rage, in awe, and in that standing, we become whole. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not a state of completion or clarity. It is a state of coexistence, the shattered and the solid, the old and the emerging, the terrified and the anchored, all held in the same breath. We spend lifetimes chasing purity, when what the soul truly needs is permission to be complex. We think healing means becoming clean, free from contradiction, polished and presentable. But the truth is, the more integrated we become, the more haunted we are by the fullness of our past. Healing is not escape. It is confrontation. It is choosing to remain in contact with the very parts of us we once had to amputate. And contact is painful. But it is also the only way we stop reenacting the past in disguise. The unconscious does not seek relationship but recognition. The ego must confront the repressed material and reconcile with the id's primitive desires. He does not care how successful you are, how insightful you've become, how many books you've read on trauma. He wants to know, will you sit with me, now, in the room where it began? Will you feel what I felt, without translating it into strategy or reason or blame? Will you allow my need to exist, not as pathology but as truth? Most adults cannot do this. They want the child to change, to evolve, to grow up. But the child will not move until he is seen, until the adult stops demanding performance and begins instead to offer presence. Presence means slowing down enough to hear what you have silenced. It means waking up in the middle of the night and recognizing that the ache in your chest is not random, that the emptiness is not weakness, that the loneliness is not a failure of connection, but a relic of abandonment. These feelings are not new. They are ancient. They are echoes from a time when you were small and unseen. And the tragedy is not just that it happened, but that you learned to normalize it. You called it independence. You called it strength. You called it growing up. And all the while, something inside you froze. To thaw is to risk regression, to feel young again, helpless again, dependent again. These are not failures. They are thresholds. The psyche does not heal by moving forward in a straight line. It loops. It reopens, it circles back, and every time it does, it invites us to respond differently. Not with denial, not with distraction, but with compassion fierce enough to withstand discomfort. Compassion that does not flinch, compassion that does not rescue, compassion that simply stays. And staying is the hardest part, because we were trained to leave. Trained to detach, to dissociate, to push through. We learned that safety lies in distance, that the closer we come to our own pain, the more danger we are in. But this is a lie, inherited from a world afraid of feeling. The closer we come, the more real we become. The more contact we make with what we truly carry, the less we are ruled by it. The unconscious demands attention, not because it is malevolent, but because it remembers what the conscious mind cannot afford to hold. It remembers the cries that were ignored, the needs that were mocked, the moments when the self was split to protect the system, the family, the culture, the myth. And so we carry this memory forward, encoded in the body, enacted in our choices. We form attachments based not on what we want, but on what we know. We pursue patterns, not people. We chase reenactments, not relationships. And when they fail as they must, we blame ourselves, or others, or fate. But the deeper truth is that we were never taught how to love without betrayal. We were taught to abandon parts of ourselves in exchange for connection. And now, as adults, we do the same. Not because we are broken, but because we are loyal to the only love we've ever known. Loyalty to dysfunction is not irrational. It is the deepest logic of the abandoned child. If I can become who they need, they will love me. If I can hide this need, this anger, this longing, they will stay. And so we become skilled at suppression. We learn to curate ourselves, to edit, to present only what will be accepted. And then we wonder why intimacy feels hollow, why we are exhausted, why no one sees us. But how can they, when we have spent decades hiding in plain sight? To be seen, we must first see ourselves, not the version we prefer, the version we left behind, the version we exiled because it made others uncomfortable. That version holds the key, not to happiness, but to truth. And truth is the beginning of inner wealth, because once we know what we carry, truly know it, not conceptually, but viscerally, we can stop outsourcing our worth. We can stop begging for scraps of validation from people who cannot give what we were always worthy of. But this knowing is not easy. It dismantles identity. It tears apart narratives. It leaves us naked before our own pain. And yet, this nakedness is the most honest we will ever be. It is where we stop performing, where we stop pretending that we are okay, that we have it all figured out, that our wounds are behind us. They are not behind us. They are within us, and they are waiting to be met with something stronger than denial. They are waiting to be met with recognition. Recognition is not an idea. It is a posture, a stance of psychic openness that says, I will no longer run from what shaped me. I will no longer dress my trauma in success. I will no longer demand that the past justify itself. It cannot. It need not. It only asks to be seen. And in that seeing, something shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but undeniably. A thread pulls tight. A silence breaks. A part of you whispers, finally. And from that whisper, a new beginning forms. Not a beginning of escape, but of return. A return to the inner ground where the child still waits. Not for rescue, for resonance. Not for repair, for relationship. Not for perfection, for presence. And when you offer it quietly, without fanfare, without performance, you will know what it means to reclaim your wealth. And as you walk, you begin to notice something strange. The pain doesn't leave, it deepens, but not like a wound worsening, more like a signal finally finding its way through. The ache sharpens into meaning. The grief becomes a language. The silence begins to speak. And you realize, this is not the end of suffering. This is the end of confusion. You are not broken. You are responding. You always were. What looked like dysfunction was coherence in disguise, the psyche organizing itself around survival. The symptom was never random. It was code. It was memory encrypted in behavior. And now, as you listen, the code begins to unravel. But listening is not passive. It demands stamina to stay in the presence of unintegrated pain without recoiling, without trying to fix or flee, is a radical act. It is an act of devotion not to healing as a goal, but to the soul as a reality. And the soul does not care for your timelines. It does not rush. It does not promise reward. It simply waits. Waits for you to stop negotiating, to stop demanding that your suffering make sense, that your sadness be justified, that your fear be appropriate. It waits for you to feel what was never allowed. And when you do, something ancient and sacred stirs. This stirring does not feel like triumph. It feels like collapse. The collapse of the ego's illusion that it is in control. The collapse of the belief that suffering is weakness, that need is shameful, that emotion is dangerous. You collapse not into despair but into truth. And in that free fall, you may touch something you had long forgotten, the original self, unfiltered, unmet, untouched by the strategies of survival. The part of you that felt everything before it knew how to numb. That self has no language, but it has presence. And in that presence, you do not need to explain who you are. You only need to be. But to be fully is to risk exposure, and exposure carries terror. Not the terror of what others will think, the terror of what you will feel when you stop hiding, because when the masks fall, so do the barriers, and everything you buried begins to rise. Grief, like floodwater, anger, sharp and precise, longing, vast and bottomless. These are not problems to solve, they are truths to face. And facing them, you become dangerous not to others, but to the systems that required your silence, the roles that demanded your compliance, the internalized voices that kept you small. This danger is your wealth, the capacity to disrupt inherited patterns, to name the lie where others nod in agreement, to refuse the seduction of numbing, to say no when the old self would have smiled. This is the return of sovereignty, not egoic control, sovereign feeling. The ability to stand inside your inner life without fracture, without panic, without apology. Most will not understand this. They will call it self-indulgent, dramatic, unnecessary. Let them. Their judgment is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to the self you once abandoned to be loved. And love, real love, begins here, in the dark, in the quiet, in the unwitnessed moments where you choose to stay with your pain instead of escaping it. That choice is love. That stillness is love. Not the sentimental kind, the revolutionary kind. The kind that says, I am here. I am not leaving. I do not need you to be okay to be worthy. I need you to be real. This is the love the inner child never received. This is the love that reclaims the self from exile. And with this love, integration begins, not as a project, not as an outcome, as a process of returning, of remembering, of re-inhabiting the body, the voice, the need. You stop trying to become someone new. You start unbecoming everything you had to be. The masks fall. The defenses soften. The ache remains, but it is no longer empty. It is full, full of memory, full of meaning, full of the self you are now ready to meet. So you walk, not toward a goal, but toward the feeling you once fled. You let it find you, let it shape you, let it teach you what no book, no therapist, no philosophy ever could. that your symptoms were sacred, that your resistance was wisdom, that your suffering was the proof of your aliveness. You were never broken, you were breaking open. And now, with eyes unclouded, with heart unguarded, you begin to see, not as the adult who overcame, but as the self who endured. This seeing is the beginning of truth, and truth, once felt, cannot be unfelt. It ruins the false life. It dismantles the performance. It demands reality. And reality, for all its brutality, is also the only place you can be fully alive, fully in contact, fully human. This is the return, not to innocence, but to intimacy with yourself, with your story, with the depth that was always there, waiting. And when the walking slows, not because you've reached the end, but because there is no end, you begin to understand what was never taught, that this, all of this, was never about becoming someone better. It was about turning toward what you were made to turn away from, that what you thought was ruin was the doorway, that what you tried to forget was your foundation, that the very places you feared to feel were the only places capable of giving you back to yourself. There is no final moment of arrival, no glorious summit where the past disappears and the self stands clean and whole. There is only this, a deeper intimacy with what hurts, a clearer gaze toward what shaped you, a quieter, more courageous presence in the face of what remains unresolved. You will still feel the old aches. The grief will still visit. The dreams may still fracture into memory. But you will not run. You will not beg for anesthesia. You will not apologize for needing. Because now you know the pain is not the enemy. The silence is not the failure. The mess is not the shame. They are the evidence that you stayed, that you turned inward, that you faced the child you once left behind, and instead of offering him redemption, you offered him truth. And in that truth you found your wealth, not shiny, not loud, not performative, but rooted, enduring, real. It does not glitter, it grounds. It does not protect, it liberates. It does not erase the past. It threads it into the fabric of who you are, not as wound, but as witness. This is where wealth begins. In the quiet place where you no longer betray yourself to belong. In the stillness where you hold what no one else could hold for you. In the fierce love that says, I am mine now. I remember. I remain. Keep walking. Keep remembering. Keep returning.